also want to talk about using AI automation tools and how to approach them in teams and with your managers or with your direct reports and employees, and how to integrate that into, group work, or how you figure that out and how you navigate it. Because I think it's always been the case that there's been different productivity tools, more recently around digital communication and what kind of tools you can use at work, how you should use them, how you should use them with your team members, and how to test them out and evaluate them and figure out what works and what doesn't. The same thing is going to happen with AI and automation tools, right? What is acceptable to use for your job? What are you allowed to do? What does your manager understand? And how do you balance what work you're doing and what work is a really core part of your job and the performance of your job, and what segments of that, sections of that, what tasks can easily be automated, and how do you explain what you're doing and what you're automating, and how do you bring those processes or those tools that are useful to work, and also if things end up not working as well as you expected, how do you approach that? Because that's the other thing that could happen is you find a great new AI automation tool or something that's going to help you out with your job, you think it's going to be great, and then all of a sudden you realize there's a problem with it, or it didn't work exactly the way you expected, or you might just need to tweak the way you use it. So it's important to really approach these with a fairly open mind, but also be critical about them and what their effects are, how they're appropriate to be used and how they're not. Because with all of these tools, especially as we see an initial kind of excitement to use them and to try and apply them in a lot of different ways, we're going to find that things go wrong, or things don't work exactly as we expected, or we just make mistakes with them because we don't fully understand how to use them. So it's a lot easier to approach it if your work environment is kind of more open and accepting to innovation and trying different tools, and you've got a lot of kind of trust within your team or with your manager or with your employees. And you can say, okay, well, definitely try these tools within these guidelines. So don't put confidential client information in, don't put any sensitive trade secrets. We've seen that a bit with things like Samsung putting meeting notes in and putting their confidential documents into ChatGPT, and then all of a sudden, technically then Microsoft has access to that. So there's definitely limits on how we should use these tools, especially initially. And it's great to test stuff out within a kind of limited time frame or environment or for specific tasks. So try it out on something you think it could be really good at, and also test it out where damage is limited. So it can't do a lot of harm. So you're not putting it in charge of complex decision-making processes or really important documents or plans or processes. You're using it as an assistant and as a tool to use out its capability to test things out, and then have conversations about what it's doing. Because the other thing is you'll find that people are maybe using these tools quite differently, and they have different styles. And we can almost compare this to writing search queries like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when Google was just emerging. Like, it took a lot of people a long time to figure out how to use search querying effectively. It's still a difficult task for some people, but if you can use it effectively to find or manage information and use it in a way that complements your own style and your own work and what you want to do, that's great, but it takes time and practice. And then it also takes some time to share that knowledge about, okay, here is the specific way you write a prompt, you write a command. It's like, writing a query into Google. You can use different ways of presenting information to this computer program that helps it understand what you want to get from it and give you the results that you're looking for. So some of that is just going to be experimentation, and there's a lot of experimentation going on with AI tools and a lot of conversation that's going on in public. So you're going to find a lot of YouTube videos or podcasts or tutorials or a lot of different areas people are discussing this. So if you work in a relatively open, innovative, and kind of trusting workplace, or with a team that has those characteristics, then talk about it and say, here's how I'm using it, here's what I'm using it for, here's what it's great at automating, and here's the problems I've had with it too. And then someone might say, oh, okay, I've had a similar problem, here's how I fixed that, or just don't use it for that because it creates all sorts of problems. I've definitely had those conversations with other people. And if you work with a kind of consistent team, a traditional workplace where you can talk with your team about the tools and the productivity tools you're using, great. In the same way you might be talking about the relative merits of different communication or messaging platforms or calendar, software, productivity apps, that kind of stuff. Talk about different AI tools you're using and share that information. If you work more independently, you're in a remote working environment, freelancers, you don't have a team in the same way, then it's definitely good to find communities who are talking about this, and other freelancers or other independent contractors or people who are trying to use these tools in different ways, but in a way that is relevant to your work and their work. So those might be different discussion groups, whether there's definitely Discord groups or Reddit communities or, different forums online where people are discussing all of this stuff and trying it out live. That's a great place to be talking about, again, what works, what doesn't, what you should automate, what you shouldn't, and some of the drawbacks, because you're going to see all sorts of problems. But also the tools are changing, right? So as people are using it, these AI companies, whether it's ChatGPT, whether it's Bing, whether it's Google Bard, which is now rolling out, they're changing in reaction to how people use them. So don't over rely on any of these, because their features, the way they work, what they're doing could be changed, removed, deleted. So that's something to be aware of too, is because these are early tools that are being tested with live interaction and people using them, is they could change substantially for better or worse. It could be more useful, or they could have a whole bunch of their capabilities reduced because there's, concerns with data protection, because there's concerns with copyright, because there's concerns with the type of information or misinformation they might be producing. So there's all sorts of ways they could change unpredictably in the relatively short term. So it's good to talk about that too, because it may be the prompts you're using or what you're using it for now, or we're trying to do a month ago, all of a sudden don't work in the same way in a month or 2 months. And as new iterations of the product, new versions of the product roll out, they could actually change substantially. And you don't know if that's going to be better or worse generally, and better or worse for you and what you're using it for. So these are tools that are going to change very quickly. They're not going to be things like Microsoft Word that is generally essentially the same product as it was 20 years ago. Like, it's a bit more sophisticated, there's more you can do with it, but look and feel and the intent of it, generally the same. These could change substantially. So that's something to be aware of too, especially with over-reliance on them. And I've talked about in other videos thinking about what you want to automate, because there's no guarantee that you will be able to use it in the same way over time. Now, who knows what can happen, or what's going to replace them, or what's going to come along. But having those conversations and thinking about how you want to use it and communicating with other people around it, how to use it as well, both in best practices and what works, but also that conversation about what part of your work do you really want to automate? What does a human need to be in control of? What role do we absolutely want and need human judgment to play in our type of work? Whether that's for caring about people or collaboration with other people, understanding the needs of clients or customers or other people on your team, people you work with. Like, what are the judgments and the decision making and the complex, difficult, challenging stuff that we do not want to automate and that we cannot necessarily trust an artificial intelligence or a language model or whatever, or an automation tool to do for us, because one, we don't necessarily understand how it works. The developers might not even fully understand how it works. And more generally, philosophically or ideologically, we just don't want to automate that part of our work, our workplaces, our society, our relationship with other people, because this stuff is moving really fast and it will be used however people use it. And companies will develop tools, whatever the demand is for. So if there's a huge demand for something, whether or not it's something most of us would want to be automated, someone will create that tool or that product. So it is up to everyone to think about how you're using it, what sort of data and information you're putting into these really complex computer systems now, and how you want it to be used in the future. And you're talking about that and having these discussions now, because it's still relatively early and it's still a point where we're still figuring it out and we can all have an impact on shaping the discussion. So please do.